All right, here we are. We are live. I am excited to introduce Pete Anderson and Christopher Brown from ETP Agency. What's going on, guys? Thanks so much for doing this.
Hey,
Thanks for having
Moritz,
us.
thanks for having us.
Yeah, so give me the quick before we get into the questions and everything. And anyone that's watching, right, is a live AMA, so feel free to ask any questions, drop them in the chat. But before we get into it, give us the quick origin story behind what y'all do and what ETP Agency.
I'll chime in there. ETP Agency was originally founded in 2018 when I exited the mainstream agency business and purchased a big portion of a venue called Baby's All Right. They were building one at the time in the Los Angeles location, and I got behind that as an investor. And now it's opening as Pacific Electric, which is a venue owned by the TVG Group, now Mumford and Sons. But at the time, I was sort of changing the way that we were going to do things, so that we were going to sign more producers, more DJs, more curating club night types of events. And I was going to straddle the line between club nights, festival development, and agency development, because the two are very intertwined. And then COVID happened and sort of flipped the script a little bit, changed the roster a lot. I used to be in rock and roll. I dropped the rock and roll part of the business and really embraced the electronic side. Christopher was working at Paramount in business affairs. He had worked with me previously at APA Agency, and I recruited him back, and we started rebuilding, and that's the origin story. Christopher, you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, that sums it up. I started working with Pete around like 2015 and then kind of segued for a few years in like film and TV stuff. And then, I like to say that he lured me back, to the side of hope. So here I am.
Side of hope. I love it. Let me ask just like a basic question. So like this is more geared towards college students, anyone watching on LinkedIn and things like that. So I'll ask them the more basic stuff. But what does like a day to day or week to week look like in the life of an agent?
I can start with what I face, because Christopher and I have different roles in the agency. I oversee the electronic side. He oversees the hip hop side. I handle more of the booking. He handles more of the administrative functionality and running the company. So on a Monday, so we typically keep our Mondays wide open. This is a special exception because, we obviously work in electronic music. The vast majority of our shows happen on Fridays and Saturday nights. And so typically on Monday, we have a lot of email that just sort of pours in to our inbox, and we got to answer all that. Christopher, after a big weekend, is settling all of our shows, getting the money from the promoters, deducting our commission, and then releasing the balance to our artists. And I am cleaning up on Mondays. And then once I get a hold of that, I take a look at my agenda for the week. I typically have like 5, 6, 7 tours that I'm booking. Sometimes we have special campaigns that we're running. Like we have vast databases of all the college buyers in the United States. We have databases of every festival buyer, people that buy series, ski resorts that are booking events, all kinds of things. And so we run specialized pitches. I usually start those on Tuesday or Wednesday. And, just sort of, we're an agile functionality, like we try to be able to respond and just sort of work our way through the work, because we're a small company and we have 40 artists and every day is different. Christopher, what's your week like?
Yeah, I mean, usually I start the week off like, kind of reviewing everything that happened over the weekend, reaching out to all the buyers and, checking in on all the shows that took place, pinging them for, settlement sheets. Reviewing the settlement sheets and just kind of like, verifying everything's accurate and correct. That whole process, sort of begins on Monday and kind of plays out through, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, really. And then also, just like Pete was saying, seeing if I have any outstanding settlements due to our artists that, can be settled up with our artists. Checking in on like what our sort of contract pipeline looks like for outstanding contracts that are, getting ready to go out for the shows coming up in the next like couple months. usually throughout the week, we both, we'll do several meetings with our clients, to check in, review our strategies, review our touring and our routing, game plans for the week and stuff like that, check in on the clients to see how they're doing. And yeah, I mean, we do a lot of that every single week, and it's kind of a similar workflow, but at the same time, there's a lot of great spontaneity that's sort of baked into it, because different things are happening all the time. And so, you kind of get to wear a lot of different hats at a small company, which is what I really love.
Let me ask you, how does someone become an agent, right? So like, I know there's many different ways and many different paths. I'm sure you both came from very different paths, but if you had to map out like the ideal route, like someone's sitting in the college classroom right now and they're thinking about internships, like where should I intern or what kind of job should I work if I can't get industry experience right away? Like what are, in the most ideal world, like how would you map out a path to someone becoming an agent? And like, what are some skills and maybe classes they could take while they're in college, or some skills they could acquire? Like, I don't know, maybe it's, if you can't get a job right away in the industry, maybe work a sales job and learn sales. That's kind of what I always throw out there for agents. Maybe it's not a good example, but what your ideal path look like for someone sitting in a college classroom right now?
I mean, I think that's a fine path that you laid out. I started in sales. I started at Dell Computer, which we talked about the last time we did a podcast. But yeah, I mean, I think ideally, like Christopher and I do have similar backgrounds. We both started at major agencies. I started at WME. He started at APA. I worked my way up through the mailroom. The initial job was basically delivering mail, as the job description implies, cleaning up desks, just doing random work, floating on agents' desks when their assistants were gone. And then you work your way up, gain the trust of an agent. They hire you to your desk. Then maybe a bigger agent brings you along. Then you become a junior agent, and then you get promoted. I do think that it's important to have some structure when you're starting. There are a lot of agents out there that kind of, I mean, for lack of a better expression, they just kind of like, what's the word? Raw dog it. I don't know. That's kind of a funny expression, but people use that expression to talk about like flying without headphones, for example.
Right.
But within the agency business, what I'm talking about is people that just start booking their friend, or just start, for a record label, like picking up the artists that aren't signed by agencies, and they just huck their body at it. The reason that's problematic is because you never learn the rules.
Right.
And you have to learn the rules of the game in order to win. Like if you understand all the conventions of the business, the rules that everyone abides by or should abide by that keep you in an ethical standpoint, then you'll always win every conflict that comes down the pipe, because you're abiding by the rules and your competitor is not. Chris, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think, the mailroom is an amazing path, just because of all of the reasons that Pete just said. I think if you're like a college student starting out, one of the biggest challenges that you're going to face is that, you just don't have the relationships yet. So I think that a good place that, you can kind of start from, from the ground, so to speak, is starting with like your local clubs and, whatever market you're in, and trying to get some exposure to that, some experience under your belt, like with a talent buyer, even if that's just like, you're helping out somebody who's buying shows for that club, or, you're working at that club, in some capacity that involves booking. I think that's a great way to kind of get, some first exposure, to the business from that side. If you don't have the relationships at, say, an agency, or you haven't gotten that internship yet, I think that's a good way to start, locally, so to speak.
For sure. Are there any classes anyone could take? So let's say like they're these days they have music business and entertainment business majors, right? Which I wish existed when I was in college, but are there any classes anyone could take as electives that you feel like would be helpful? Like, is it finance? Is it marketing? Is it something else? Like, what are some electives people could take that could be helpful?
Well, it is the music business. I mean, I did end up getting my MBA. So I have a background in marketing and finance and economics and all that. And that stuff is informative. I think, you being a college professor and teaching kids, again, the rules of the game or how things work is really helpful, because then you don't have to learn by experience or by suffering or by making a mistake.
Right.
which is yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Chris has a background. He's a lawyer, so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think anything business related, like finance, accounting, business management, marketing, any vital function of business. I think one kind of area that I find that a lot of the sort of like new gen that's coming up can really work on, and I think this has a lot to do with just like COVID and the fact that they've had so much exposure to like online meetings and
Right.
not as much face-to-face interaction and communication. Is there's this tendency to like shy away from meeting people and like from networking and doing business development. So I think that anybody that can really kind of cut their teeth on business development type opportunities or knowledge or skills is super important. You still have to be able to walk into a room full of people that you don't know and build relationships, and I think that that's like becoming more and more of a lost skill among like the kind of younger gen. It's like they go into a room full of people and like they're just kind of like looking around like, I don't really know what to do here. And it's like, well, you just got to talk to people and you just got to start conversations and you just got to start building relationships,
100%, totally true. And I know, like, and hi Nicole, welcome back, and anyone that's watching, feel free to ask questions. This is for you. I am only asking questions until other questions come in, so I have some prepared as filler, but feel free to ask questions, anyone that's watching. For internships, everyone starts at zero, right? So I know a lot of people, when they look at internships, they are very intimidated because they have no experience. But knowing that everyone starts at zero, like, what do you look for? Like, I know you have a couple of interns. Like, what do you look for in internships? What kind of internships do you offer? And how can someone stand out on a resume to at least get an opportunity for an interview?
I can speak to that one a little bit about what we're offering. We're offering exposure to like every aspect of the business because we're such a small company that, what's great about interning with us is that you get exposure to like, everything from operations to administration to, actual booking and touring and routing and just procedural things that are super important to maintaining accuracy and organization when it comes to touring. How do you keep your records? How do you, decide what stage a show is in and how do you track that? Those are all areas that they get great exposure in. But things that we're looking for, I would say, we're looking for people that have exposure to booking, that have booked some kind of a tour or have booked for someone else, or have some exposure to, other aspects of the music business. And, obviously are, pursuing that as a career path is always a big plus, but that's not always what we're looking for. We've had some non-traditional people come through and do really well. We had one person that was a partner at a law firm who decided to re-enroll at a university and interned with us. And, that's worked out like, very well for him. And he was a very good partner to us, and wound up working with us for quite some time. So that was a great, I love seeing like a non-traditional path like that because I think that that's interesting,
Sure. Yeah, I was a non-traditional pre-med before I went into the music industry. I don't know if that was a good decision or not. We'll see. There's all this talk. So speaking of like conversation, right? Like actually meeting people face to face and having conversation, which I feel like seems really intimidating to young people these days. But it is so important to have like real conversations and maybe go to conferences and meet people. But there's all these influencers out there. They're always talking about like you have to offer value to relationships, which it's not always the easiest question to answer. Like, how do you actually offer value? But how could someone, like, I guess, offer value or gain at least your interest, right? So we're not reaching out and they're only asking for a favor. Because I feel like it's so common, especially in our industry, to always just ask, like, I want you to be my agent. I want an internship. I want this, I want that, right? But like, how can someone actually like contribute something meaningful besides just always asking for something?
I think it's really important to remember that it's a business.
Yeah.
And, like any business, you have to have some kind of model for it to succeed.
Yeah.
Some kind of, extra essence to it, some sort of character that's going to make it stand out. So in terms of like your music, one mantra that they repeat in the agency business is don't be afraid to ask for anything, because if you don't ask, it will never happen.
Right.
So you shouldn't be afraid to ask, but you should, mind your P's and Q's, ask for things that you think have a chance of succeeding,
Hmm.
like, don't be like, oh, I'm just starting and I want to play an arena tour. It's not going to happen that way. That's just not how it goes. So you gotta like know enough about the business to position an ask that has a likelihood of, a positive result is one thing I would say. Chris, you have something to add to that?
I think from the artist perspective, it's like, do you have a foundation? Do you have an audience? Like, do you have a following? Have you booked, at venues before and sold tickets? At the end of the day, like, we're in the business of like getting people to buy tickets. What does your ticket history look like?
Yeah.
And, do you provide value in that way?
Sure.
If not, do you have the marketing and the following that provides a sort of different value that could translate potentially into selling tickets? Maybe you haven't sold tickets just yet, but you definitely have a built-in audience. There's interest in you. So if you can prove that, I think that's a way that you can prove that you have value.
And shifting, I guess, to the artist side, right, a little bit. Do you have any guidelines you could suggest? And I think I may have asked you this last time, Pete, but guidelines as far as like maybe creating a little bit of self-awareness, right? Like, at what point should I actually reach out to an agent? I mean, zero tour history, right, and not being able to sell any tickets to your hometown, probably not a good parameter to reach out to an agent yet. Or having only 10,000 monthly or less listeners on Spotify, probably not a good time to reach out to an agent yet. Like, if you had to put like some hard statistics or data or history playing live, like, what could be some good guidelines someone should maybe try to aim for before reaching out to an agent, saying, okay, I think I'm ready now. I just hit these minimum goals, and I want to maybe present myself to an agent.
Well, agents are looking for different things. Number one, different agencies, different tiers of agencies are looking for different things. Like, WME is looking for something completely different than what we are.
Yeah.
We're an underground electronic music agency that also does, neoclassical genres and hip hop. So, I think that if you're going to ask for an agency to take a look at you, know your audience, number one. When I was working at WME in the Nashville office, it was artists had to have a record deal. They had to have a manager before you could chat with them. That's not true for us. What I look for specifically, because we have deep relationships with Burning Man, for example. Like, Burning Man is kind of unique in that it is sort of a platform for developing electronic artists. So we maintain relationships and then also produce shows at Burning Man for that exact purpose of finding people that have community within that world that want to grow that, or us taking artists that have communities from other places and introducing that Burning Man community to grow that. So in short, it's about having some kind of momentum, whether that is a community of artists that are supporting you, or you're selling out shows in your hometown, 500 to 1,000 cap. You have relationships that are developing with other artists that are in your field. That's really important to counterculture genres. Collaborative tracks that are coming out, remixes, because that can lead to touring opportunities for you to support them. So momentum is something that you need to quantify on your own, in your own terms, that's relevant to your genre and your path forward. Chris, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree about like knowing the genre of where you're submitting yourself to. Like, sometimes we get these interesting queries from like hardcore metal groups, and I look at them and I'm just like, what about our roster is like resonating with you, like, and making you feel like this is a great fit. It's just like, it just shows that they didn't take the time to like research if this was a good fit. And that's sort of telling in its own way, that they didn't take the time to like see what sorts of things that we were booking for that would be a really good relevant fit to what they're doing. So I think that that's super important, is having that preemptiveness, to research and to make sure that it's a good fit.
Yeah, that's a great.
Yeah, I was going to say, unfortunately, we're finding that more and more often because of AI models that are coming out and because of how lazy people tend to be. because like you can basically buy a database of every independent agency in the United States, and you can send a bulk mail merge or a BCC email and copy everybody. But it's going to become very, very apparent to people when you do that, and they're not going to feel like responding because it feels like spam.
Yeah, AI is a tool, not a replacement of doing the actual work and homework, right? You can utilize it for anybody watching, right? You can utilize it to help you, but it's not a replacement from doing the actual, real, authentic outreach and work. And yeah, like great thing that you added there, right? Like Chris, with the whole like actually research the agency. Like, don't be a metal band reaching out to an EDM hip hop agency, right? Like, actually research the agency and the agents and why you feel it's a good fit for you. And that's with everything. I mean, even when you're reaching out to venues and things like that, like if you're reaching out for a date at a venue, like look at the calendar first. I mean, and don't assume just because the date's open on the calendar that it's available. But if you see a show booked on the date, like obviously don't reach out. Or if you see the venue only doing certain genres and you're a metal band, right, and they don't do any metal shows, and maybe also not a good venue to reach out to.
Well, and it's too, just, I mean, also for interns who are coming to like, potentially try and intern with us to pursue, to see if we're interested in having them as an intern, like research the company ahead of time and look at who the artists are and like take the time to like, actually invest and research, everything, every aspect of what we're doing so that you can have that dialogue with us when you come and approach us.
Yeah, exactly. And then let me throw a couple of things at you that I teach in the classroom a lot, and would love to get your thoughts or anything that you have to add to that. And again, anybody's watching, if you have any questions, feel free to throw in the chat. I'll prioritize your questions, but I'll keep filling in stuff until then. But what I teach in the classroom a lot is I have these rules. So that's the 50%, 80%, and 100% rule, right? And the 50% rule is never play a venue unless you can fill at least 50% of its capacity. Like in Orlando, for example, everyone's played House of Blues and they do local nights, but it's a 2,000 cap room. And if you and your lineup can't bring at least 1,000 people, you have no business playing the House of Blues. Better yet, maybe play at Will's Pub, that's 200, and try to sell 100 tickets to that, right? But bare minimum, 50% has to be sold of what the capacity is. Ideally, it's 80%. So 80% is the I'll call you back rule, right? If you can fill 80%, I'll call you back. Or the 100% rule is whoever they're talking to, they're going to take your call, right? So ideally, you can underplay, even if underplaying means you're turning away 20 people. But if you can sell out a venue, that even means even more for promoters and agents and so on. And then the other thing I always throw out there on how to get on an agent's radar, and it's maybe a little more old school, but instead of touring the entire country, like if you can tour a region and find 8 to 10 markets and develop those markets and sell 200, 250 tickets to those shows, yes, agents look at Spotify, they look at TikTok and everything else. But if you can accomplish that, because at the end of the day, we're in business selling tickets. If you can accomplish that, you can get on an agent's radar. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that or any feedback to that.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is feathering the nest is the expression we use to that, which is that, you don't want to play a show in a market before you can sell tickets there. Mm-hmm. It's kind of funny because like back in like the 50s at the dawn of the modern concert industry, like labels would use touring as a means to promote the music, because the recorded music sales is how they used to make their money. Mm-hmm. So it was like, all right, this label is going to come in, MCA is going to come in, they're going to book an amphitheater and they're going to put like 10 of their artists on and they're going to promote and people are going to show up. It's not how it works anymore. Now it's like labels are following the zeitgeist. Agents are following the zeitgeist. They want to see where the crowd is drawing them, what they're paying attention to, things that they've discovered on TikTok or other social media platforms. And then they want to go to that show. So that's the way you got to think about it. There's a lot of artists that we have. And if you look at modern touring schedules today, you'll see there's certain genres that never hit the middle of the country. They'll only hit coasts or like Europe. And then there's other genres like bass music and electronic where it's almost entirely the centrality of the country. They don't do as well in LA or San Francisco or New York. They do really well in Des Moines and Omaha. So, play where you're wanted. Play where there's demand, 100%.
That's right. Chris, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to take an opportunity to, discredit TikTok a little bit. Because it's not everything that everyone says it is.
Yes.
And one thing I love to do, and I feel like me and Pete have kind of had a few talks about this, like when we've been at festivals and stuff, is I like to just see like where people are migrating by foot. You know, when you're at a festival, like who's actually walking to go see something, and where, like, what does the crowd migration look like at a festival? You know, it's almost like watching an organism, you know, and it's really, I really enjoy that aspect of attending a festival, is like, you know, kind of having the freedom to kind of say, okay, like what are people going to see right now? You know, and where are people walking? That's a really, to me, more reliable indicator of what's drawing people's attention right now than say TikTok, you know, because there's a ton of artists that have, you know, millions and millions and millions of followers on TikTok that can't sell a ticket, you know.
100% true. Yeah. So many thoughts to that. So one, the festival thing is actually a really cool example, because it's so true, right? When you have like the small artist playing a side stage of a festival, but all of a sudden like the entire crowd like is leaving the main stage area when there's nobody playing, and they're heading to that stage, and it's like, whoa, what's going on over there? So this is actually a really great indicator. And I agree, just because you have a following on TikTok or wherever on social media, right, doesn't guarantee ticket sales. Like I've literally done shows with millions of followers on Instagram and TikTok that couldn't sell a ticket to save their life. And I've done shows with artists that have like 10, 20,000 followers, and they're selling 600-700 tickets to a show. So yes, it's a good tool, again, a good tool, right? But doesn't replace anything. Is there anywhere else besides like at festivals that you look for artists? Like, what is your approach to proactively looking for artists to find new talent that you might be interested in working with?
I mean, part of it is word of mouth, and you know, something that Christopher's been driving home throughout the podcast is you know, networking and getting to know people and figuring out, you know, like really using networking as a tool and understanding that it is part of the job and that you do need to develop relationships with these people. Because I think sometimes like people that are new to the industry might feel like that's inauthentic to try to meet somebody because they're the manager of so-and-so, but that's your job. That's your job for your artists. The more connected you are, the more valuable you are. So take that and internalize it and use it for yourself, because those are the kinds of people that also introduce you to new artists that are coming up. You know, you gotta listen, keep your ear to the ground, in the words of Eminem.
Yep.
I think too, when you've met somebody and when you've spoken to them in person, like face to face, and you've had a human interaction, you know, it really deepens the relationship a lot more. And so that goes such a long way, you know, when a show doesn't play well or something goes wrong, or, you know, some sort of mistake occurred, you know, that goes a long way, because, you know, it's like, hey, you know, we've met, we've been emailing for years, you know, we've known each other for quite some time, you know, let's make this right as best we can so we can continue to move forward, maintain a good business relationship, and continue to work really well together.
Yeah, I mean, people are a lot less likely to be rude to you, right? If they've met you in person and you've had, I don't know, coffee together or lunch together or something like that, versus like you've only been talking over email and text. And also the other thing I always add to the relationship building part, right? So if anyone's listening, is least personal to most personal, right? It's like probably like a random DM, probably the least personal thing you can do. Then take that to an email, take that to a text, take that to a phone call, take that actually meeting someone in person, right? Being the most personal thing you can do. And it always reminds me of my old boss. I don't know if you guys had I think Pete, you definitely worked with him. I don't know, Chris, if you worked with Sonny at House of Blues, but he would, one thing I've learned from him that I always constantly have to remind myself, like now being on the management side, is he never confirmed a show without picking up the phone. Even if you could do it all over email, like he had all the details, the deal was accepted, right? But he always picked up the phone to quote unquote go over the deal. But like 10% of that conversation was actually about the deal, and 90% of it was him either giving someone shit if they're a football fan about their team, or talking about family or whatever else. It was really more focused on the relationship. And I learned so much just like sitting there listening to him do that.
Yeah, Sonny was a legend. What's he up to these days? Is he retired?
Yeah, he's retired, but not completely. He does so once a year, the day before Thanksgiving at Tipitina's, they do these I've been doing it for 2 or 3 years now, where he does like a show right the night before Thanksgiving. And the first year was a tribute to, and this is at Tipitina's, so like the venue he started at. And the first year was a tribute to Professor Longhair. I forget what the second year was, but the third year was the first time he had a living legend, and it was Irma Thomas they did a tribute to, and she was there sitting on like a throne the entire time, and I had all these local artists pay tribute to her, and it was a cool experience. So he's doing that, and then another thing he does, he has a record club. Well, so Tina's has a record club. That's like a membership thing that they do. And once a year, one of the records is from Sonny's collection. So, like, for those that don't know, Tipitina's is a legendary music venue in New Orleans, historic, and he was one of the first buyers there for a long time until the House of Blues opened. And he was also the sound engineer there before. And he recorded every single show that he mixed in the 70s and maybe even 80s until he started booking. And his house is like a museum. Like, he has all those records, all those old records. And once a year in the house, Sonny, knowing if I'm just gonna know Sonny, but he puts a lot of thought into something, right? And once a year he donates an album to the record club for Tipitina's that they create a record out of. That's from his personal collection of a live recording from back in the day. So those are things that he's still dabbling in these days. But yeah, really, really awesome dude.
Yeah, well, I miss Sonny. He's part of the old school. I like that.
Another cool story about Tips, Chris, you'll really appreciate it since you grew up in New Orleans. But when Katrina happened, right, all the, like, if you've been in Tipitina's, like, they have all the old posters there from old shows that they used to do there, and a lot of them got destroyed during Katrina. And once they replaced them with, or actually from Sonny's original collection from when he did shows there in the 70s and 80s. So all of his old posters are hanging in there now.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Looks like a question from Nicole French, by the way.
Yeah, we have a question. Nicole, thanks for the question. I'm trying to break into touring in a support role, like a tour assistant. How do newer artists usually start building their touring team, and how do people typically get those first opportunities? And just a quick background, Nicole's been joining the live streams for about a week or two now, and has been on every single one of them. Her background is in production, if I have it right, but it's more on the political side. So she worked for like political campaigns and has worked a lot of live events, and is now looking to get into the touring side of the music industry.
Okay. Well, Nicole, kind of leveraging your background and some of the knowledge that maybe you gain in politics, I think that let's start with the artist part of it. How do newer artists usually start building their touring team? I think you have to, what we do internally is we create affinity lists for new artists, which are basically just a list of artists that you want to tour with. And it's about your genre, and it's about the audience that you think is going to resonate with your music, and about capturing that audience. So when newer artists are looking to build their team, they should look for agents and agencies that have a footprint, a beachhead in those markets, so that they're pushing their efforts towards the right genre class. If you start talking to the agents that represent the headliners that you want to support, that's going to potentially lead to a tour, also potentially lead to team development. Chris?
Yeah, I would say, one is to build the relationships directly with the artists, because, kind of expanding on what Pete just said, a lot of the time the artists too will have a say in who they're curating as their support. So they might have some preferences, and a lot of the time, if an artist really likes you and, really resonates with your music, they might look at you as a potential tour support if, they feel like it's strong enough for them. But another thing I would say too is just like, I think management is also a good, kind of first step in, if you're just starting, out, you can start looking at maybe booking something out like as a manager for somebody. Because there are managers, traditionally, managers aren't supposed to necessarily be booking, but like, I feel like if you're, an emerging, developmental artist, a lot of them have people who are just wearing all hats, and they might call themselves a manager, but they're actually doing booking too. So, I feel like if you're with somebody that's that small, they kind of need somebody to do both a lot of the time. So that's a good way to kind of, get an entry level path in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One last thing about that. If you're trying to get a tour assistant job, within your community, start showing up for the events that are relevant to your genre.
Yep,
Go ahead, Chris.
100% agree. 100% agree with that. Go see shows, meet people, make stuff is what I always say. Another question from Catherine. What are the qualities you look for in a potential intern or employee? Are you most interested in a diverse resume or a candidate's interest to grow?
I'll defer to Chris on that.
I think the first thing we look for is more like sort of trait based, yeah, obviously we're looking at your experience and stuff, but we want to know, like, do you have an entrepreneurial mindset? If you want to pursue the career path of being an agent, a lot of it is just like being creative and figuring out a way, like, to actually manifest like bookings for this artist. So there's a lot of creativity that's sort of baked into that, even if the artist does have a following, is established, it's like there's a lot of strategy that goes into like where do I want to tour them? What time of year do I want to tour them there? All of those types of aspects of the tour. So you want to see somebody who has some element of creativity and experience in, trying to build something. And trying to like, look at the business aspects of it as the pillars to build it. So that's really key, is an entrepreneurial spirit. Also, attention to detail is huge. I can't tell you how many times, like, we might assign something and like just so many details get missed. And it's like, like this is where the difference between good and bad is. It's right here, right here in the details, and everybody like makes mistakes from time to time. And, it's really hard not to in this business because there's so much, back and forth in the communication and everything. And it's hard to get it right, like every single time, all the time. And so it's like the more attention to detail you can have and the more that you can sort of follow, like double checking your work and like, making sure that you are following certain protocols and procedures. Like if you have a workflow and a system that you've sort of built systemically to prevent you from, having lapses, that's super important to have like some sort of safety net to say, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this, and this to make sure that this doesn't happen. Right. Mm-hmm. So the more that you can do that and prove that you can do that and show, that you have some history of that, and having those sorts of soft skills, like that's very important. Excel is huge. Like, spreadsheets, making sure that all your data is super organized. Everything happens like almost like project management experience, I think is great, because if you can show that like you've taken on a project, you've built it out, you've executed it, so much of it is execution and making sure that you can properly execute. And there's so much of that attention to detail that then, gets carried into the actual execution, because when you've pre-planned everything, very, very well, and everything is laid out perfectly, like, hey, here's the run of show, here's what time's curfew, here's what time the performance is, making sure that the artist has all of this information, that is key to success for an artist. And, it's like the pillar of trust that you build with them in terms of your communications with them, that you're all on the same page, that we're all doing this together, that this is a huge team effort. And also just making sure that you can collaborate cross-functionally with other people, on other teams. There's no one's getting all the credit for this. It's a huge team effort and everybody's got to be on, their game to make sure that things go correctly.
Right.
Yeah. Just chiming in on that one too, because Chris said a lot of important things on that. But the teamwork functionality is a really big one. A lot of people love to be like the superhero, be Superman, get all the credit. That's actually a very negative quality for businesses. Agencies don't like that. Managers don't like. Nobody likes that, because the artist is playing the show. The tour marketer, the tour manager is advancing the show and making sure the production works. The buyer is booking the show and promoting the show. The venue owner is providing the venue. There's just so many people that are working towards that show. And for some people to be like just beating their chest, it's all me, is just complete crap. And it's just irritating. And then like within the teams, there's a lot of people. But the other thing is that Chris mentioned that there's an entrepreneurial work ethic that is really important. So that's work ethic, right? And then he's talking about an attention to detail being very important. That's fantastic, extremely important, and he's completely right that that's the difference between horrible and great. And then the third one that I wanted to mention was just a sense of style and taste. Like, you're working in the arts, you need to have an aesthetic, you need to have, like, an ear, so to speak.
Mhm.
You need to be paying attention to what people like. So if you do get those kinds of things together, those three aspects in a candidate, then you got something really special. Things we don't pay a whole lot of attention to because they just become like less and less important in time is the university that you went to.
Right.
It can be really important to go to college. It can also not be important at all. I've met Harvard students that I think that blow my mind with how stupid they are in the real world.
Yeah.
And then I've met kids that didn't even graduate high school. They're so smart that I just don't understand how they were gifted with that kind of intelligence, that mind at such a young age. So people are all different. I think your resume is not as important as the qualities you bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. And I'll echo the teamwork thing one more time as well, right? From a manager and from promoter side, like, and even like having students do real life projects, like it's yeah. I mean, it's a very typical saying. There's no I in team, right? It's like making the. It's funny. I have a funny movie quote that just came into my mind, but you remember the movie Drumline? That's like one band, one sound, right? You gotta love the sound of the band greater than the sound of your own drum. I mean, it's kind of true though. Like, you gotta love the entire team and the project greater than like the one thing that you contribute to the team. It's good to have something that's great that you contribute, but if you're making it all about yourself, like, it's usually never a quality that people want to have around. And with teamwork also comes good communication, right? And knowing, like, some self-awareness that with communication, like what is internal communication and what's good external communication. Like, is there something that, if there is a thread of people within your own company and other companies on the same thread, like what do you keep internal and what does everybody see, right? Is there some things you need to clarify internally first before you blast it out to the entire group? So it is good to work fast and it's good to be on top of things, but it's also good to be very mindful of things and think things through. Just an example, the mentor that I work for now on the management side, like, it depends on what it is. Like, certain things, yeah, we respond very quickly to things. But like when we're dealing with, I don't know, like high level IP stuff, and reaching out to a company in Japan, like, we'll read through those emails. Like, he'll literally read through every single word several times and like maybe a little too much detail, right? But over analyze every single word in that email, and every word has intention, and it's not just an AI bot that wrote this email, right? So there's a lot of attention to the detail, as you guys mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then shout out to the people at Full Sail. King T said, great chat, guys. I will recommend this video to my students at Full Sail University. I used to teach at Full Sail, actually, and awesome school. But and yeah, and thanks for sharing that with all the students over there. There's something I wanted to ask, and because of the tangent we went on. I guess let me jump to the independent promoters, right? So, and we're also almost out of time, but if anyone else has a question, please chime in. But for independent promoters out there, so on Wednesday, we're doing a Zoom hang with my students for the Making It Academy, and most of them are promoters that want to get into the promoter world. So anyone that is interested in that world, come join us over there. Feel free to, I'll drop my email here. Feel free to send me an email if you're not part of the academy. I'll happy to invite you guys. I'd love to have as many people have some face-to-face time with Pete and Chris as possible. They have a lot of insight, and I want to have a big audience there for that. But for the independent promoters first starting out, like, what are some qualities that you look for in an independent promoter? Because I feel like I'm obviously having been on the independent side for most of my career. I mean, I have worked for the big ones as well, but I feel like the independent promoters and independent venues are like the lifeline of the industry. Most of the shows out there are booked by independent promoters and independent venues. So someone that's starting out as an independent, like, how do they stand out from the outreach, right? Their first outreach to you to actually sending an offer to you? Like, what makes you pay attention to someone and want to give someone a chance to promoting a show besides the giant amount of guarantee they put on the offer?
Well, I think that number one is that you don't want to have to teach people how to do the business when you're running the business. So like, if somebody on their outreach expresses a level of amateur behavior, you're less likely to respond. you're going to want somebody that knows how the business works, and also specifically about the genre. So a really easy way to do that is to provide a lot of the details about what you're asking for on the front end. Don't just reach out and be like, hey, are you available in the fall? Hit me back. And it's like, okay, no. What's the date? What's the city and state? What's the venue? Is it private? Is it public? Like, our job is to protect and serve the client just like a sheriff would. And in that regard, one of the things that we look for is holes in the promoter to see if something does go wrong, because they do all the time. They're gonna be able to be even financially solvent to weather a storm or not. Because if they're not, then that puts everyone in a bad situation. I'll give you an example of that, because that kind of scares people when you hear that. But like festivals, right? Like, a really quick, easy question that agents slip in when they're trying to determine whether a festival is solvent or not is it a sponsorship funded event? If the answer is yes, that means that you're relying on corporations to fund the business, to fund your business model. The second question to that is, have these sponsorships been landed or not? And if they haven't, then that's an issue, because you're a sponsorship-driven event, but you haven't landed your sponsors. That means you're going to try to use the artist to land your sponsorships, which is completely backwards from the way that it's supposed to work.
Right.
So that's a way that you can poke a hole in a promoter. Also know your lane. Like, if you're brand new, don't try to be too ambitious. Start small.
Yeah.
Don't risk everything. A saying that I live by is actually, you can save more money than you can make. Which is true at any fucking level. Think about what's happening with the federal government right now. They're trying to save money. They're trying to, $150 billion they cut on Doge didn't do anything. That's wild, right? But on a much smaller level, don't risk the house on your first show. Start small, start to learn about how to sell a show, how to promote a show, how to gather an audience, how to sell tickets. You're going to make a lot of mistakes in the beginning, so don't do it with a ton of money. Try to book them on door deals. Try to be pragmatic and realistic about what's going on, and then express that to the agent so that they give you grace in that moment. If you're look, I want to help develop this artist in Orlando, and they don't have an audience here, but this is what I'm willing to do, then that agent, sensing your realism and sensing your attention to making it a successful event, might book with you.
Chris, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I would just add is also just paying really close attention to how you're conducting business, right? So, what information are you providing me when you're asking to make a deal with me? And how well versed are you in knowing how to confirm a deal? But also, when I say the information that you're providing, I'm talking about, what is your business entity? Who am I transacting with here? Right. Am I transacting with the venue? Am I transacting with a third party promoter? And I need to know what the name of your business is.
Yeah.
If you just tell me, hey, it's Ground Collective, and I'm like, well, what is that? Is that a company? Is that an LLC? Is that a corporation? And they're like, well, it's not any of those things. It's like, well, who am I? Am I just transacting with you individually then? There's a lot of things that people can say, that will be very telling to you about their level of, business knowledge and experience based on the questions that you're asking them. So if I ask you what the name of your business entity is and you don't really have a name, then that's very tough. Yeah. I'm going to be like, well, I think we're going to need your full deposit up front
before confirmation.
Commit to doing this performance,
Yeah. 100%. Well, we'll dive deeper into that on Wednesdays. We'll leave a little cliffhanger. So we'll dive deeper into the promoter world. And there's also some artists in the Making Academy, so I'm sure we'll have some artist questions. But thank you guys so much for doing this today. I really appreciate your time, and thanks Nicole, Catherine, for the questions, and King for sharing it with the Full Sail students. Any last words of wisdom for anyone that's watching this later or listening to the audio?
Stay positive.
Love it.
Yeah.
Optimism's a big deal. I honestly, there's ways to kill things from happening for yourself and for others, and that's to be really, really critical and try to shoot things down. I think one of the things that's really helpful in the industry in general are people that are always trying to build and optimistic about building and working together.
I'd say stay humble and stay hungry.
Yep.
Keep a level head, even when things look like they're going south.
Yep. Yeah. And then I'll end it with my normal ending, but always lead with kindness, be mindful of others. And we may not be saving lives, but we are in the business of making people happy. And what greater purpose than that? Thanks, guys.
All right.
Thank you for having us, Chris.